Hey everyone, so I'm going to be going over some stuff for my anatomy quiz, which is starting in about an hour and a half. So I'll just go through some of the stuff that I'm going to be studying to prepare. Okay, so the topic that's being discussed in this chapter is on sensory pathways and the somatic nervous system. So the first figure I'm going to be talking about is this one. So all the different pathways and responses to a stimulus. So the way it starts is a stimulus comes in, then there's a depolarization of the receptor, action potential occurs. Once threshold is reached, then that information is carried along in axons of sensory neurons to the central nervous system for processing. And then as the information is being processed, it's distributed to multiple nuclei in the spinal cord and brain. So going down this path, if we're aware of the arriving sensations relayed to our primary sensory cortex, then it's considered a perception. The motor pathway, voluntary, or more on the efferent division. So this is more of the afferent, the stimulus coming in and it being processed, and then more on the efferent to a effector. Voluntary response, which is not immediate, can moderate, enhance, or supplement relatively simple involuntary reflexive response. And then for the involuntary response motor pathway, we got an immediate involuntary response. These information goes straight to the spinal cord or the brainstem, and it's mainly directing a reflex response even before information reaches the cerebral cortex. Okay. So at some point, I'm going to be going over some of my notes now. At some point, a stimulus arrives at a receptor. So at the beginning of the circuit, organs are receiving a stimulus. At a receptor, which is divided into 3 areas. Uses special senses, visceral receptor, and somatic senses. General senses, in other words. We'll be right back. So there's 3 types of receptors. Receptors are divided into 3 areas. Special, visceral, and somatic senses. Somatic senses are more in the skin, coming from the muscles, joints, and the skin. When a stimulus arrives at a receptor, it must reach threshold through chemical gates. An action potential which is propagated at the central nervous system. An action potential is propagated at the central nervous system where there is processing. If it is a sensation that makes it all the way to the cerebral cortex. If it makes it all the way to the cerebral cortex, it becomes a perception, because we're able to, as it said in the last figure, we're able to sense it. Excuse me, it's very cold this morning. A sensation is a stimulus that is received and makes it to the central nervous system. conscious and subconscious parts of senses. So perception versus sensation. Afferent and efferent division. The intensity of a stimulus comes in as a loud or weak sound. Intense stimulus versus weak stimulus is based on how rapidly neurons are being fired down. Intensity comes in as a stimulus, but how is it transmitted through a circuit? It is based on how many neurons are receiving information, or it can be a rapid firing of neurons reaching threshold very often, or a lot of neurons honed to the same receptor. Stimulus intensity is transferred through frequent impulse on receptors. General senses, as opposed to special senses, are senses laid out throughout your body. Has a field of sensitivity area. One spindle fiber in muscles relaying information about just a certain group of muscles. So general or somatic senses are more all over the body. Yeah. Filled with sensitive areas. Okay. That's that. In the next, our most previous lecture after spring break happened, talking about sensory input and the cost part of the story. So involuntary and voluntary responses, if it is not visceral. So there's three types of senses: general, somatic, visceral, and special senses. So these senses bring out an action potential that gets sent to the central nervous system for a reflexive or voluntary response. Oh, there's a bit of a recap in the beginning here. So we're still talking about the same figure I just showed you guys. They bring out an action potential that gets sent to the central nervous system. For reflexive is more of an involuntary response. Or a voluntary response, you get a perception, goes to the cortex, cerebral cortex or sensory cortex to produce a voluntary response. A sensation and a perception is kind of similar. Sensation is it goes up all the way up to the central nervous system. It's processed, and its effect may be similar to a response to a reflex. But the difference between that and the perception is the information gets processed and goes all the way to the cerebral cortex to produce a voluntary response. very similar. Next figure. Next figure is this one, receptors and receptive fields. Each receptor cell monitors a specific area known as a receptive field. As you can see, there's receptive field 1, receptor field 2, and there's a bit of axons and neurons and dendrites that connect to these receptive fields. How do you classify senses? Senses can be classified as either general, somatic, or special sense organs. If it's general, it means it has somatic origin. Covers the sense of touch. General senses cover the sense of touch, pressure, pain, temperature, vibration, and proprioception. Proprioception is the position of muscle extensions of your joints. Sensory organs include the Golgi apparatus. Joints have sensors that sense how much they have been moved. Once again, the general senses include touch, pressure, pain, and vibration. So a stimulus, there's different senses, touch, pressure, pain, vibration, all that stuff, is all these senses or stimulus or modalities, they're all received by receptors. And there's different types of receptor types. First one is I'm going to talk about is mechanoreceptors, so touch receptors, pressure, tactile receptors would be another name for the touch ones. Pressure receptors, baroreceptors. Thermoreceptors are the sense temperature. So general ones all over the skin, below the epidermis. They're in 2 different places in our body. So the skin and the hypothalamus. Thermoreceptors sense temperature. General ones, they are all over the skin and below the epidermis. So thermoreceptors are in 2 different places in our body. They can be on our skin and on our hypothalamus. They are sensed by the hypothalamus, thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus, ensuring proper temperature. Thermoreceptors ensure proper temperature. Proprioceptors give a sense of body position. Nociceptors, nociceptors give a sense of pain. Photoreceptors, retina of the eye. Chemoreceptors include the sense of smell and taste. Mechanoreceptors include more. When you hear the term mechano, it's more about equilibrium of the inner ear and hearing. Noci is pain. Photo, vision, chemo, smell, and taste. Okay, next figure. So the next figure we're going to be talking about is the tactile receptors in the skin. So as you can see here, you can see the free nerve endings, root hairs, tactile corpuscle. Our professor just wants us to know that they exist. Yeah. So we don't need to know all the different receptors on your skin, only need to know a few. So baroreceptors are in the brain and the digestive tract. As we said before, we have baroreceptors, which are part of our list of mechanoreceptors. Yep, they are. Okay. So baroreceptors are in the brain and digestive tract. And the baroreceptors are in the lungs, telling your pons, pneumataxic centers, and medulla. Tells your pons and medulla when to expand the lungs. Chemoreceptors are in or near respiratory centers of the medulla. They sense oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels, pH levels. pH is sensed in the hypothalamus. Okay, now we move on to the next chapter already. So, already onto the olfactory organs. So you can see in this figure, we're talking about smell when we talk about olfactory. The olfactory nerve is nerve number 1. Conic versus phasic receptors. This is what this figure is about. Okay. When information comes in at greater strength, the interval of impulse is sped up. When it comes at lesser strength, then the interval is slowed down, but they are sensing constantly. Conic receptors receive information at a regular interval. Touch, pressure, and Adaptation is different senses in your body become accustomed to a stimulus at different rates of speed. An example would be your fast adapting senses when you're not aware anymore of incoming sensations such as touch, pressure, and smell because your body has already adapted to those feelings. Slow adapting senses are senses you're still aware of. Examples include pain, body position, sensations of a long period. Sensations for a long period of time, you're able to still feel it. It's more spaced out into intervals when you feel it. The next figure is pretty big. It covers these 2 pages. Yep. Okay, so these, I'll just go over what's being talked about in these pages. So first one's about olfaction, smell. So when you smell something, there's a bit of depolarization called a generative potential. And then a generative potential produces an action potential once that stimulus happens. So there's these things called odorants. They're dissolved chemicals that stimulate olfactory receptors to interact with receptors. Okay, I don't think we need to know that. So taste, vision, hearing, equilibrium, these senses are all special senses. Or they all have specialized cells. Oh, so when these guys are triggered, they release chemical transmitters at the stimulus, at the synapse. Similar to acetylcholine, I guess. Yeah. There's a bit of slight synaptic delay because the synapse after the stimulus rise and the chemical transmitters are released. Okay, went through that. So a stimulus is picked up by a neuron, specifically a sensory neuron, as we've seen from these. I'll show you guys from these figures. There's always a stimulus that comes in. It's picked up by receptors on a sensory neuron. For this one specifically, that's a specialized olfactory neuron. See, the stimulus comes in, reaches a receptor cell here, and then still reaches a sensory neuron. So neurons pick up the stimulus. Okay. Receptor cell is a stimulus hits a specially sensitive cell, which then speaks to its neuron. So we don't need to know things about G protein, cyclic AMP, and things like that. Those don't involve receptor neurons. Okay. When the stimulus arrives at a receptor cell, the input grades up to a threshold. Receptor potential goes up to a graded potential. At the initial stimulus level, the graded potential is called the receptor potential. Receptor potential goes on to make an action potential. Back to the figure of the bit distracted there. So receptor potential goes up to a graded potential, and a graded potential goes up summates to an active action potential. Okay, back to this figure of the olfactory organ again. So we have olfaction sense. It's the least evolved sense. It gives us the ability to sense chemicals in the liquid environment. As a molecule odorant enters these extra long dendrites. Neurons have long dendrites to pick up these odorants. For all the special senses except vision. Know the anatomy of the collecting structures only to the level of cells. Types of receptor cells on their associated structures: mucous epithelium, sensitive olfactory epithelium, dissolve airborne molecules forming an action potential. Types of receptor cells and their structures: airborne molecules get dissolved and form an action potential. Olfaction is one special sense as direct. Olfaction can go straight to our memories and emotions because it goes straight to the hypothalamus. Meaning it is a direct special sense. Neurons become nerves that go into olfactory tracts, leading to the hypothalamus, triggering memories and emotions. An example would be Cornette-Jergens lotion sting, going straight to the memories after smelling something from her childhood. Conscious awareness doesn't become a perception. It makes it to the central nervous system. You don't become aware of it until it makes it to the cerebral cortex. The trip takes longer than the trip to the hypothalamus, associated with other memories. Smells are not like tastes. Smell discriminating one odor from another. So smell goes to hypothalamus, gets processed at the cortex to discriminate different smells. Okay. Next figure. Next figure is on taste. So gustatory receptors, the tongue, and the different papilla. So there are different shapes of papilla: spongiform like fungi, filiform like a leaf. Papilla have a crack in each side where saliva is kept and dissolved in saliva are the taste molecules. They sit in these cracks until taste buds take them in across their membrane for the formation of an action potential. Taste papilla are little bumps that we thought were taste buds on the surface of the tongue at the back of the pharynx. It is dissolved in saliva while gustatory taste buds process and form an action potential. Microvilli are taste hairs that take the taste in and it becomes a neural message. I need to focus. We need some fresh air. Microvilli are include taste hairs that take the taste in and it becomes a neural message. And that the axons takes and forms cranial nerves. The inner ear is responsible for equilibrium of rotation, position, and acceleration of up, down, forward, backwards, has three semicircular canals. So there's a figure for that. I know there's a figure for that here with the semicircular canals. There you go. There's the inner ear, semicircular canals. Inner ear is responsible for equilibrium, rotational position, acceleration, up, down, forward, back, balance. Has three semicircular canals. Middle of the ear is involved in detection of sound. In the cochlea, as mechanical bending and moving terms. Other types of equilibrium takes place in the vestibule. When info from three different semicircular canals give position of the body in space. So there's three special sense structures, the cochlea, the vestibule, the central canal. Probably find those in the figure. Okay, so I found it. So cochlea, the semicircular canal, and this looks like it's the vestibule because it says vestibular duct. Let's look at another picture. Yeah, vestibular branch, semicircular ducts. Maybe there's another picture. There we go. Vestibule, cochlea, semicircular canals. Central canal for rotation and body position. Hearing relies on all three of these. Semicircular canals are filled with ducts. Fluid inside these ducts are called lymph. Canals are bony structures and ducts are socket tubes filled with lymph fluid. Perilymph, endolymph, not just water, lymph fluids, also water allowing them to work right. Most of these lymphs, including, are completely thickened, not just like water, essentially movement of fluids. At three canals triggers ampullae. Ampullae is disturbed at the end of each canal that contains drum-shaped structures. Inside each drum structure is a thickened form of lymph fluid. Okay. Ampullae have a thickened form of lymph fluid. Endolymph fluid gets thickened into a gel. The gel bends the hair cells that are bent to a certain degree, as the ampulla will pull on them. This tells you your position in space. Tilt, bending gel, and bending hairs. Right? I basically covered all the notes. I'm just gonna read through all of this and go over my online study guide that I made. Hopefully this quiz goes well. Thanks for watching. Apologize, it's a very sunny day. Allergies acting up for me. Peace.